But let's start with this. John Wilner of the Wilner Hotline, who covers the Pac-12, and he does an incredible job with the Pac-12 coverage, saying that the Pac-12 board meeting, what we had been told might be yesterday, was not, met this morning, told presidents received a positive update, and the process will continue. Next board meeting is the second week of April. Key point, the situation could be resolved prior to that point or after. Scheduled meetings are not the only avenue for voting/approvals. And then one more comment. The only thing I know for certain, I have been told by multiple sources for weeks, is the negotiations with Apple and Amazon take much longer than that with ESPN because they don't have contractual templates for college football deals, so every step goes back to the lawyers for review. Jason Shearer, who does a great job covering Arizona and the Pac-12 too, he asked John a question on Twitter, and I've seen them do this, and they're both reasonable with it. In terms of negotiations, that would infer presidents have the numbers, correct? And John responded, I'm sure Kliavkoff has seen initial numbers at least. Honestly, I don't know what has been shared with full board or executive committee and whether all parties have submitted final bids, whether there's a range based on tiers being mixed, matched, etc. These deals are really complicated. We'll get to more of the comments from Jason Shearer, even Bob Thompson with a comment too.
Yeah, that's it's all very interesting of where the Pac-12 is headed. And look, if ESPN is out, and we already knew that Fox is probably out, and again they're out until they're not, right? I mean, until there's a reason for them to come back in. But this got a little bit more. Like in one way it's simplified, another way it's even more complicated. But the fact that it's going to be mostly streaming and then some linear partner is going to come in after they make that deal really is interesting to me. And just the road continues to wind here on this Pac-12 TV deal, which makes you wonder if you were one of the presidents and be like, man, how do these other networks or these other conferences just go straight down the road? It's like they, got on the highway to TV deal and they drove until their exit and got off. That's not what's been going on for the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear an update and just see where they are. I think there was a lot of expectation because, there had been kind of a loose date put on, Tuesday as being a meeting day and potentially that being a news day as well. But we didn't hear anything about possible expansion, and we obviously didn't hear anything about the TV deal. But, a day later we do get that update, and John Wilner's right on the pulse, and so sounds like there's still a lot to unpack. Just makes me wonder why you would kind of refer to things being close, but maybe they are. Maybe it's next week things are done. I don't know. Like, none of us clearly really know, but this does seem like it's going to take a bit longer than initially expected, or even in the most recent updates people started to expect. But, hey, they're still negotiating, and, we'll see what that looks like on the other end. I do think it's interesting from the standpoint of, again, I've tried to drop little comments in here, just making it less about the Big 12 versus the Pac-12 and more about just the story itself. And I think in this streaming age that we are entering or in the midst of, to see a group have to go this route where they're doing something that is non-traditional and they're not negotiating with just ESPN and Fox and going that route where everything's kind of already laid out pretty clearly. All you have to really, I think, quibble over is probably just the money figures, right? Because you sort of know the deal on what the channels are and what amount of games you're going to be allotted and that type of thing. Whereas with this, not knowing really what they're discussing, like, is this a Friday night game of the week on Amazon? Is this, 2 games a week on Apple? Like, how does this sort of work? And how does it work when it's entities that have never done this before in the college space? I mean, the Amazon NFL thing is entirely different from going and doing Cal versus Arizona State, in Tempe, or, going and doing Arizona basketball in Tucson. It's a little bit different than rolling into Philadelphia and doing Eagles versus Raiders or something like that. So, I think that between that and just the Apple, I mean, what they've got soccer, and that's what they're accustomed to, and some baseball, but they're definitely not in the college football space. So it's interesting to see how there's a different dynamic in terms of trying to get everything the way that you want it situated. And there's still that lingering mystery of what exactly that looks like on the other end. I mean, once they do settle on all of that, is that a primary streaming? Is that a money figure that's up to what you expected? That remains to be seen.
Here's a question I have as well. So if all the streaming companies, HBO Max, Netflix, everybody's trying to rework their model because they know they can't get rid of them, but they know that they spent too much money getting them off the ground and it hasn't turned profitable yet. And best estimations have them doing that next year, but they've lost billions of dollars. If you're the Pac-12, even if Apple and Amazon are willing to give you this money, my question would be on the long-term sustainability of it. And are you hoping that just because you're coming in when everybody's trying to rework the model, that you get into that flow now? But what if streaming's not profitable for 10 years?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Well, Jim Williams answered some of that, you know, when I said, are they ahead of the curve, but just too far ahead of the curve?
I've thought of that too, though. Like, what if they are onto something? Like, everybody's just, kicking them while they're down or seemingly down. But there is part of me that sat there and thought, like, if this is truly the next big thing and it's coming at us quicker than anybody really expects it to, it's not going to be 5 years when everybody ditches cable wholly. It's going to be more like 2 or 3. Then that lines them up perfectly, does it not? To be like already there with a footprint on the 2 biggest streamers that are, in the game, so to speak. Because I don't think, Netflix, Paul, is anywhere close, I don't know that they're ever a live sports company. Do you think so?
No, I mean, like, only if it becomes just so crazy profitable that they're like, oh, we've got to get in on this. Or there's just something out there sitting for them.
Are they right now a movie or series
documentaries?
Yeah,
that's what they do. Like movie series, documentaries. That's where they.
Well, I have it.
They basically, they basically kind of turn into their own studio, and that's where they spend a boatload of money and just basically burned a lot of it with high-profile actors in semi-successful to bad to pretty good movies under their own umbrella. And then a lot of just movies over the years that have come out, and then some TV shows and whatnot. But they've never, they as far as sports goes, they are the documentary kings. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have the best documentaries, and I think they've proven that. But I don't know if they've ever shown the appetite for that. But I only bring them up just because, like if the Pac is onto something here and they sign this evolutionary deal or revolutionary deal, then that could be the model that we're talking about when others go back to the table in a few years. You're going like, they're following the playoff cup plan, but again, there's still questions to be answered.
All right, so there's more between Jason Shearer and even John Wilner, but we wanted to give you the latest in John Wilner with that news from earlier today, and then Jason asked the question about, again, what do they know? Here are a couple of more from Jason on today's news. He had asked him about, Kleofkoff had seen initial numbers, and then he goes, this was before back and forth with Wilner. Last point on this whole thing, hopefully, presidents have 100% been presented with numbers. They aren't close to good enough. George says, give me some time, and we do the whole cycle again where you're lied to about the significance of these meetings. Now, that's Jason's opinion. We're giving you, he has always been kind of a little bit not all in on this. And then there was one more from him as well that he said, just a reminder with Apple, there better be a plan to get games on linear, which is regular TV, or it won't work. Presidents have been very vocal about the majority of programming being streamed. Robbins, Arizona's president, came out and said it for everybody to see. Yeah. That was when they had a lot of the comments, President Robbins, Arizona State, Utah, all of them last week.
So who's that going to be that does that, and how does that work? Because this is, again, in reverse order of how you normally do it. You're going to give your tier 1 and tier 2 rights here, and then the tier 3 are going here, which is the streaming. That's what ESPN Plus is, for the most part, is tier 3 rights, even though there's the tier 1 games are on that too. If you don't have cable, everything's available to you in that hub of sports. But it is interesting to see where this is going to go through. There are just so many different things to navigate when it comes to how are you going to get that out there. And again, they might be just resigning themselves to the fact that, look, the people who are going to watch Pac-12 football already watch Pac-12 football. Yeah. But USC will grab us some numbers. Maybe if we had Oregon and Washington when they play, that will grab us some numbers. But let's be realistic about when Stanford and Oregon State play, that game is mostly watched on the West Coast by people who are planning to watch it anyway. So instead of trying to swim upstream and continue to convince a network that that's going to be any different, then let's just make a deal that gets us the most money on streaming.
Jim Williams said this to us yesterday, and a lot of you did respond to his segment yesterday. We got a comment about that in a minute. But he did mention in something he sent me today that if, in fact, ESPN is not a part of the Pac-12, and if, in fact, the Pac-12 does remain as one, they won't have anything on the West Coast.
No.
And do they want that? I mean, is that something that might keep them at least in the water?
Well, that would maybe make sense for them to be that linear partner who gets the,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that right now
yeah.
we hear that ESPN is out. We've also had Fox, whatever. But if ESPN, with who they do have, doesn't have any piece of the Pac-12, isn't it safe to say that they would want some sort of visibility as far as college football, which is the second most popular sport behind the NFL as far as television dollars or television numbers? Would they not want to have something on the West Coast? And for them, would it be better for them, I don't know, better, that if in fact something does happen and people were to like slowly jump off, then that might give them the West Coast if something was attached to the Big 12? Anyone? That's just something he brought up in an email to me today.
Yeah, I mean, I think of course they. I don't know. There's just a lot of just like speculation, and I know we've been a part of that too. But I think in terms of that, like, of course they would like that, but I don't know if that is it simply a money thing or not, because I think you could say the same thing about the Pac-12. Do they not want to be on cable TV on Friday night? If they could be, like the ESPN game all to their lonesome, I think that's kind of been pointed to as the crown jewel of the conference, right? Is the ability to have like the different time zone and have that late night spot to yourself. So, I would imagine that's enticing for both, but whether that's something that, monetarily they see eye to eye on, I don't know about that part of it. But I would imagine that's probably part of the negotiations. It would make sense. And it's worked well for both before, so yeah.
Apple, of course, has the deal with MLS, but they also have, is the right terminology, subleased it? They have baseball, but they also have subleased some of the MLS games, like 15 of those, to be broadcast on Fox. All right, so here's Bob Thompson. We've had Bob on many times in the last year. He was responding to the John Wilner tweet that John was updating everybody on kind of where they were and also responding to Jason's question. Having dollars and having a deal are two widely separate things. Case in point, the Apple TV Plus NFL Sunday ticket negotiation. The price portion was basically done, but terms couldn't be resolved. Deal cratered. Deals do die over terms.
Look, the Apple TV NFL Sunday ticket deal, as it was described, and would have been... Look, it would have been a boon for Apple TV, and it would have been great. The NFL would have just gotten a big, Apple would have just opened up their vault and been like, you guys get to be in here for an hour. Everything you can tie down. Like, come on and get it. And it was going to be huge for both sides, except for the fact that there was all these little complex distributor deals that are in contracts with the teams and in the league that Apple wasn't going to budge on, because what they wanted was Apple TV Plus to be the home for every single DirecTV game, and they were not going to change their price point other than normal fluctuations in the market for people to do it. So if Apple TV Plus cost $9.99 a month, it was going to cost $9.99 a month with the NFL, because Apple can afford it, because they have an overall valuation that's just like the GDP of like 50 small countries together. I mean, they're just so wealthy. They could do it, but it didn't work out because there's the devil's in the details, and those little details are what derailed it, and that's why YouTube got it.
Yeah, speaking of details, I don't know if you mentioned or not, but John Canzano did say just a little while ago that Fox is a part of it still.
I was going to,
Okay.
Well, that's okay. No, because and we were told, and I don't know if it was Bob Williams who said this, or possibly, I don't know if it was Jim Williams, but that even though someone's out, might even been around in Marshawn, that even though someone's not in it doesn't mean they can't get back in it.
Sure.
And that's why, in fact, I think that when the ESPN getting out of the negotiations, or at least that seems to be the case, that if you report that and you put it up at 10 o'clock that night, by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you could be old. That could be completely, when you're talking about these kind of deals, or at least those who might still be interested.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we added that in there, because that was something else that was thrown out there. And obviously is notable because, yeah, if you do go the route of, oh, no, they're clearly not involved, well, that doesn't tell or paint the whole picture. So, yeah, there's maybe more parties at the table than reported to be or thought to be, and obviously that could drag things out as well. So, yeah, that continues on, and the figuring out of how all that's going to work continues on. And, I think nobody's more ready for that to get done than the folks at the Pac-12. So we'll see how that goes. But I think I guess they took back the narrative last week with some of their comments, but to the point where now there's like an expectation this week, just a few days later. So maybe that backfired slightly, just in that, yeah, you steadied the ship and put out the vote of confidence, but you also created expectations for people. And one thing you don't do is tell somebody on social media, oh yeah, Tuesday something's gonna happen, and they're gonna be sitting there waiting with popcorn, and that's what I think a lot of people were doing yesterday. But it didn't mean that everything's cratering and falling apart, and the conference is dying by any means. In fact, there might be more involved than we know, but it's hard to tell because I think everybody's kind of been hit or miss as far as where exactly this process has been and where it's going.
From Mr. Monkey Says,